Two divers decide to dive one of the most dangerous caves in the world. One diver's body is recovered 10 years later, and the other takes almost 21 years to recover after 3 failed attempts and a chance encounter.
Jacob's Well looks like paradise. Crystal water, calm as glass.
Used to be a popular spot in the hill country, or at least it was. We're talking about Jacob's Well near Wimberley. The area is famous for its deep cave full of beautiful blue water.
Tucked in the Texas hill country. But beneath that beauty lies a deadly maze that has claimed lives, trapped rescuers, and hidden its secrets for decades. Divers speak of shifting gravel, vanishing light, and a strange pull that seems almost alive. Some never came back, others escaped, shaken and silent. So why, in 2025, is Jacob's Well still considered one of the most dangerous dive sites in the world? And what remains hidden in its depths? This is why divers are terrified of entering Jacob's Well. Paradise with a killer's smile. Out in the quiet folds of Texas hill country, just outside the small town of Wimberley, sits a place so beautiful, it looks like it could wash your worries away. Jacob's Well is a spring-fed pool framed by limestone edges, its water so clear you can see every ripple dance across the surface. On a sunny day, it shimmers like glass, reflecting sky and trees in perfect stillness. Tourists come here for the photographs, the swims, and the simple pleasure of dipping into cool water under a blistering Texas sun. To the casual eye, it's the definition of a natural paradise. But like many things in nature, the surface is a lie. What you're really looking at isn't just a swimming hole, it's the mouth of one of the most dangerous underwater cave systems in the United States. Beneath the pool, a vertical shaft drops away like an elevator into the earth. This is the entrance to Jacob's Well's hidden world, a twisting, submerged labyrinth carved over thousands of years. Fed by the massive Trinity Aquifer, the spring once erupted with the force of a geyser, blasting water 6 feet into the air at a rate of 170 gallons per second. Early settlers described hearing the rush of water before they even saw it, a constant roar that made diving impossible. The force was so strong, anyone foolish enough to try was shoved back toward the surface before they could get more than a few feet down. Over time, that power faded. As the region grew, demand on the aquifer increased. The mighty upward surge slowed, and by the mid-20th century, Jacob's Well had calmed into a tranquil pool. That's when people began diving into its depths. The first chamber is wide and well lit, sunlight filtering in from above to illuminate a rocky floor dotted with aquatic plants. It's easy to think the whole dive will be like this, spacious, bright, safe. But that first impression is exactly what gets people in trouble. The deeper you go, the darker it gets. The walls start to close in, the temperature drops, and the water shifts from an inviting blue to a shadowed green. Visibility can drop to nothing with one wrong kick that stirs up the fine silt, turning the water into an impenetrable cloud. Despite the risks, the allure is undeniable. Divers speak of Jacob's Well the way mountaineers talk about Everest, part challenge, part obsession. It's a test of skill, nerve, and respect for a place that doesn't care how experienced you are. And that calm surface is the perfect disguise. On any given summer day, you might see families wading along the edges while just beneath them, the shaft drops away into darkness that has claimed more than a dozen lives. There's a kind of seduction in that contrast, the bright, easy world above, and the silent, alien world below. From the lip of the well, you can watch sunlight disappear into the vertical opening, the darkness swallowing it whole. Divers who have been inside say it feels like entering another planet, one where every breath is measured, every movement matters, and every choice could be your last. That's why seasoned cave divers warn newcomers. Jacob's Well doesn't look dangerous, it looks perfect. And that's the problem. Because danger here doesn't announce itself with crashing waves or roaring currents. It waits in the narrowing tunnels, in the false exits, in the shifting gravel beds ready to trap anything that disturbs them. The surface is a postcard. What lies beneath is a predator. But the real danger isn't what you see, it's the places you'll never see. Until it's too late. Into the labyrinth. Beneath the mouth of Jacob's Well lies a structure as complex as any man-made maze. Only here, there's no map, no light, and no second chances. Divers who have explored it speak of 4 main chambers, each one different in shape and mood, each one pulling you further from the safety of the surface. The first chamber is deceptively inviting, a vertical drop of about 30 feet before it angles into a spacious room, brightened by sunlight filtering through the water above. From here, the second chamber stretches out like a funnel, sloping downward and narrowing as it goes. At this point, visibility is still decent, and the passage feels manageable until you notice a side shaft leading upward. It looks like an exit, a shortcut back to daylight, but it isn't. This is the false chimney, a cruel optical illusion of rock that ends in a dead end. At least one diver has died here, mistaking it for salvation. Past the funnel, the third chamber is where the cave begins to turn against you. The floor is covered in loose gravel, the kind that shifts and swirls if you so much as breathe too hard. One misplaced fin kick can fill the water with a blinding silt cloud, turning the chamber into a black void in seconds. The gravel is more than just a nuisance. In the wrong circumstances, it can trap you, pinning your legs and gear until your air runs out. And then there's the fourth chamber, the cathedral of no return. To get there, you have to squeeze through a stone corridor so tight, most divers remove their tanks and push them ahead. The walls close in until they're brushing your shoulders, and the light from your dive lamp barely reaches past the narrow curve ahead. This is the chamber with the worst reputation, the one that has claimed more lives than all the others combined. The air here is cold, the silence absolute, and the water feels heavy, as if the cave itself is pressing down on you. Inside these chambers, the physical hazards are constant. Your hoses can snag on jagged limestone. Your mask can flood if you twist wrong in a tight squeeze. Your gauges, lights, and tanks all have to be monitored with the precision of a surgeon's tools. And even if the equipment behaves perfectly, the cave's layout works against you. There are places where you must twist sideways to get through, where your shoulders scrape rock, where one wrong movement can wedge you in place. But perhaps the deadliest dangers here aren't physical, they're psychological. There's a phenomenon cave divers call the tunnel trance, a mental state where the deeper you go, the more you feel compelled to keep going. Maybe it's the thrill of seeing something no one else has. Maybe it's the silence that convinces you you're still in control. Whatever it is, it pushes divers past their planned limits, past the point where their air supply can safely bring them home. And then there's panic. It starts small. A flicker of doubt when your light catches nothing but darkness. A tightening in your chest, smudge when you feel the ceiling drop lower. Your breathing quickens, using more air. Your movements get sharper, kicking up silt that blinds you. In Jacob's Well, panic isn't just dangerous, it's fatal. The labyrinth doesn't care how many dives you've logged, how confident you are, or how carefully you planned. It waits quietly, knowing that one misjudged choice can turn exploration into disaster. And in 1979, two divers decided to push past the point of no return, sealing their fate in the most infamous tragedy Jacob's Well has ever seen: the 1979 disaster. In the late summer of 1979, two young men stood at the edge of Jacob's Well with a plan that would make them part of its history, though not in the way they hoped. Kent Maupin, 20 years old, was no stranger to diving. He was experienced, confident, and had a reputation among friends for chasing the most challenging sights he could find. His friend, Mark Brashear, also 20, was an assistant instructor and part-time employee at a local dive shop. The two shared a fascination with Jacob's Well, particularly the stories about the mysterious fourth chamber, a place few had seen and even fewer had escaped. They weren't the only divers on site that day. The pair had arrived with a group from Pasadena, Texas, camping nearby. Also in the water was another diver, Joe Moy, who would become the last person to see them alive. The plan, if you could call it that, was loose. Dangerously so. There were no safety lines, no backup tanks staged in the lower chambers, no redundant lights. Kent and Mark were relying entirely on their skill, their air supply, and their determination to get in and get out. The first two chambers offered little resistance. Both men moved easily through the open spaces, the sunlight from above giving way to a dim, filtered glow. But as they approached the third chamber, Joe noticed a change. Kent and Mark weren't slowing down or signaling. Instead, they made for the narrow tunnel that led into the fourth chamber. To get through, they would have to remove their tanks, push them ahead, and then squeeze through the rock corridor, one body at a time. Joe tried to get their attention. He shone his light, banged his knife against his tank. Nothing. The two divers seemed locked in on their goal. Mark was the last to enter the passage, pulling his steel tank behind him. Joe watched his fins vanish into the darkness. He lingered for a moment, considering whether to follow, but his own air supply was running low. Reluctantly, he turned back, leaving his light at the entrance in the hope they would see it and follow. When Joe surfaced, he waited. The water behind him grew cloudy, silt and gravel disturbed far below. Minutes passed. No sign of Kent. No sign of Mark. Deep down, Joe knew what it meant. Word spread fast. That night, a rescue team began to assemble. Among them was Don Dibble, a respected local diver with decades of experience. The next morning, Dibble and game warden Calvin Turner went down. They staged spare tanks at 25 and 75 feet, set safety lines, and headed into the third chamber. Dibble was the first to enter the narrow passage toward the fourth. He got only partway before the cave struck back. Without warning, the gravel beneath him shifted, collapsing around his waist and legs. The weight pinned him in place. His arms were trapped. He couldn't reach his safety line. The silt cloud swallowed his light, turning everything to black. His air gauge read 100 psi, maybe 10 minutes left. Panic set in, and in the quiet, crushing dark, Dibble made a grim decision. He tried to inhale water to end things quickly. Instead, his body convulsed, loosening the gravel just enough for movement. Through the haze, Turner appeared, shoving a spare regulator into Dibble's mouth. The two made it to the surface, but Dibble's ordeal wasn't over. The air he'd swallowed expanded during the ascent, rupturing his stomach wall and sending him to the hospital for weeks. The recovery effort pressed on for 12 days, with divers and equipment brought in from across Texas. But the fourth chamber refused to yield. The gravel filled in as quickly as they cleared it. Eventually, the operation was called off. Kent and Mark remained in the cave, claimed by Jacob's Well. But Jacob's Well wasn't finished. Decades later, its grip on one of those divers would finally be revealed by cold, mechanical eyes. The drone, that found the dead. For more than 2 decades after 1979, Kent Maupin's fate remained sealed in the darkness of Jacob's Well. His story became a cautionary tale, passed between divers in dive shops and training classes. There was no grave to visit, no closure for his family. Just the knowledge that somewhere in the fourth chamber, he was still there. Attempts to recover him had all ended in danger, failure, or both. By the early 2000s, human divers had all but given up, but technology hadn't. In an era when underwater drones could explore shipwrecks miles beneath the ocean's surface, Jacob's Well was no longer entirely beyond reach. A new expedition was planned, not with human lungs and beating hearts, but with a machine. The drone was a compact submersible, bristling with high-resolution cameras, multi-beam sonar, and floodlights bright enough to slice through the thickest underwater gloom. It didn't breathe, it didn't panic, and it could go where humans couldn't. The launch day was quiet. A small crowd of divers, geologists, and local officials gathered around the edge of the well. The drone slipped into the water without ceremony, descending through the first chamber like a metal ghost. Its cameras streamed clear images to the monitor's topside, sunlight fading into a pale glow, the limestone walls curling inward, every ripple in the rock preserved in perfect detail. The first chamber passed quickly, the second just as smoothly. In the third chamber, the tone shifted. The drone's lights caught fragments suspended in the water, bits of debris from past dives, flecks of gravel disturbed by unseen currents. Then the operator spotted something more personal. A glove, its fingers curling slightly in the water. It was wedged in silt, alone, as if waiting for a hand that would never come. The mood on the surface changed. Voices quieted. The feed continued. Beyond the third chamber, the drone eased into the passage toward the fourth. Here, the silt grew thicker, the walls tighter. It felt less like a cave and more like a throat, swallowing the light. As the chamber opened up, the floodlights revealed an eerie stillness. No fish, no movement, just the hollow architecture of stone. And then, in the beam's edge, a glint of metal. The operator zoomed in. It was a corroded diving mask, wedged under a ledge of limestone. The design was dated, decades out of production. Several divers on the surface recognized it immediately. A murmur spread. "That's Kent's model." They pushed the drone closer. More details emerged. A rusted steel tank with faded markings, a torn wetsuit sleeve drifting like a rag in the current. And then the lights fell on a shape unmistakably human. The body was wedged between smooth rock walls, still clad in a wetsuit, limbs frozen in unnatural angles. The current hadn't stripped it to bone. The cave's cold, low-oxygen water had preserved it far better than anyone expected. The drone hovered for a long moment, the camera fixed. Even among the seasoned divers watching, there were no casual comments, no attempts at gallows humor. Just silence. On the wetsuit's chest, a patch of fabric bore letters almost lost under silt. The camera's light brought them into focus. Kent Maupin. After 21 years, the cave had finally shown him. Recovery followed, careful, methodical, and conducted with a respect that had been denied in 1910s. Kent's remains were brought to the surface, ending one chapter of the well's grim history. But the images the drone captured stayed burned into the minds of everyone who saw them. The empty glove, the stillness, the way the fourth chamber seemed to close around him like it had no intention of ever letting go. And Kent wasn't the last to vanish. The 1980s brought another victim, one whose death forced authorities to lock the well down, the Wayne Russell case. By the mid-1980s, Jacob's Well had already claimed more than its share of lives. The stories of Kent Maupin and Mark Brashear were still fresh in divers' minds, and the cave's fourth chamber had a reputation that kept even some veterans away. But for others, the lure of unexplored territory was too strong to resist. In February of 1984, 36-year-old Wayne Russell Jr. arrived at Jacob's Well with two companions, instructors John Wilcox and Danny Self. All three were skilled divers. Wayne himself was a member of the National Speleological Society's cave diving section and had 12 years of experience under his belt. But there was one important detail. Wayne wasn't officially certified as a cave diver. Still, the team's goal was ambitious: to map the deeper chambers of Jacob's Well, including the elusive fifth chamber, a place few had even seen, let alone documented. Their dive began under cover of night. The water was calm, the surface reflecting nothing of the labyrinth below. The men descended through the familiar vertical shaft, gliding past the first two chambers, then the third, then threading themselves into the tight corridor that led to the fourth. Here, the light thinned and the pressure of the well began to press in. But the team kept going. Their mapping work required precise measurements, so Wayne carried a 100-foot survey tape, stretching it along the rock walls to record distances. They reached the fifth chamber, a narrow, twisting passageway that hinted at opening into something even larger. Beyond it lay the sixth chamber, or so some divers believed. No one had been far enough to confirm. With their air supply ticking down, the group began to turn back. It was the kind of decision experienced divers make automatically. Air reserves were safety, and safety was always the priority. But something happened in that return trip. In the tight squeeze between the fifth and fourth chambers, Wayne fell behind. John and Danny assumed he was right behind them, either reeling in his survey tape or maneuvering his tank through the narrow rock. They reached the third chamber before realizing Wayne wasn't there. Signals flashed between them. "Where is he?" John pointed back toward the tunnel. Still, with their own air dangerously low, they couldn't go back without risking all three lives. They surfaced, expecting to see Wayne's bubbles rising after them. None came. The search began immediately. The following morning, recovery divers entered the well, following the same path Wayne had taken. They found him in the fifth chamber, lying along the safety line, his tank completely empty. He had run out of air before making it back through the squeeze. Whether it was a snag, a disorientation in the tight space, or simple bad luck, the result was the same. Wayne Russell Jr. had become another name on Jacob's Well's growing list. His death sent shockwaves through the diving community. Wayne wasn't a reckless beginner. He was seasoned, methodical, and diving with two instructors. If it could happen to him, it could happen to anyone. The tragedy forced a reckoning. Officials decided Jacob's Well needed more than just warnings. They needed barriers. A metal grate was installed roughly 100 feet down, blocking access to the cave system entirely. It wasn't foolproof. Determined divers could still find ways past, but it was a clear signal. The deep chambers of Jacob's Well were off-limits. Along with the grate came stricter local regulations on diving, limits on who could enter the well, and an increased presence of conservation and safety officials. Still, for those who had seen what lay beneath, the grate wasn't just a safety measure. It was a tomb door, sealing in the lives and stories the well had already claimed. Yet even as bodies were recovered, the well itself was changing, and not in ways that made it safer. The well that stopped breathing. Long before it became a headline for its dangers, Jacob's Well was famous for something else: its sheer power. For decades, the spring didn't just flow, it roared. Fed by the vast Trinity Aquifer beneath the Texas Hill Country, The well once erupted with such force that its clear water shot 6 feet into the air. Early visitors said you could hear it before you saw it, a constant, rushing thunder that made the opening boil like a living thing. In its prime, the well discharged about 170 gallons of water every second, an almost unthinkable volume, enough to fill a swimming pool in minutes. The current was so strong that diving down was nearly impossible. The water would push you back toward the surface before you could get far, a natural barrier that kept most explorers at bay. In those years, Jacob's Well wasn't known as a deadly cave system. It was known as a fountain, a life-giving artery for Cypress Creek, feeding the local ecosystem with cold, clean water. But nothing that powerful stays untouched forever. As more people settled in the region, demand on the Trinity Aquifer grew. Wells were drilled, pumps installed, and the once stable underground reservoir began to feel the strain. By the late 20th century, the spring's legendary eruptions had slowed. The steady, vertical jet became a gentle ripple on the surface. The roaring sound was gone, and with that loss came an unexpected shift. The well became more accessible to divers. The change in flow didn't just make the well easier to enter. It altered the cave system itself. Without the constant upward push of water, silt settled more easily. Gravel beds became looser. Areas that might once have been flushed clean now held still, waiting for the wrong fin kick to send visibility plunging to zero. The current that had once acted as a safety net was gone, and in its place, a silent stillness that made the caves even more deceptive. Then came the droughts. In 2000, Jacob's Well stopped flowing entirely for the first time in recorded history. Locals who had grown up with the constant bubbling of the spring were stunned. The same thing happened again in 2008, and in the years that followed, 2011, 2013, and most recently in 2022, the dry spells returned, each one lasting longer than the last. For many, it was a wake-up call that the Trinity Aquifer wasn't bottomless. The causes weren't a mystery. Heavy pumping by utility companies, residential development, and agricultural demand were draining the aquifer faster than it could replenish. Climate change and shifting weather patterns brought longer, hotter summers with less rainfall. Each factor stacked on the next, and Jacob's Well, once a symbol of abundance, became a cautionary emblem of scarcity. Hays County decided it had to act. In 2010, they purchased 50 acres of land around the well to protect it from development. The Wimberley Valley Watershed Association added another 31 acres, creating an 80-acre buffer zone known as the West Ridge Tract. Fences went up. Conservation programs were launched. Officials began limiting public access, closing the well for long stretches during poor water quality or low-flow conditions. But here's the paradox. While these efforts were designed to preserve Jacob's Well, they didn't erase its dangers. In some ways, the calmer, quieter well became more dangerous for divers. Without the strong current, sediment and debris lingered. The water might look still and harmless from above, but beneath that surface, the hazards remained exactly where they'd always been. Only now, there was less to warn you they were coming. Jacob's Well had stopped breathing like it once did, but it hadn't stopped taking lives. But the truth about Jacob's Well runs deeper, older than Texas, older than the United States, and shrouded in stories that stretch back millennia. Legends beneath the limestone. Long before Jacob's Well became a headline for diver deaths, it was known for something quieter and older. Native American tribes in central Texas likely knew the spring for centuries before European settlers arrived. Archaeologists believe the water source was vital for survival during droughts, and oral traditions suggest it was considered sacred. The cool, clear water bubbling up from deep within the limestone would have been seen not just as a natural resource, but as a spiritual one, a gateway to the underworld, a place where the earth breathed. The modern name, Jacob's Well, has murkier origins. One theory ties it to Jacob de Cordova, an early Texas land agent whose writings in the mid-1800s describe the area. Another links it to the biblical story of Jacob's Well in the West Bank, a spring that, like its Texas namesake, has an unbroken history of use stretching back thousands of years. That biblical well is mentioned in the book of Genesis and the Gospel of John, and it too has seen its share of violence. Crusaders fought over it. Priests have been slain beside it. Churches have been built and destroyed above it. Even today, the West Bank site draws pilgrims, historians, and those chasing whispers of the miraculous. Whether by coincidence or intention, the name Jacob's Well carries with it a global echo, one that ties a spring in the Texas Hill Country to a story nearly as old as recorded history. Both are life-giving waters. Both are places of reverence and danger. And both have a way of drawing people in, even when they know the risks. In Texas, that attraction has fed a strange kind of folklore. Among locals, there's a persistent whisper that Jacob's Well chooses who comes back. Divers who've survived its depths talk about sensations they can't explain, the feeling of being watched, or the inexplicable urge to push deeper into the caves despite every safety protocol screaming to turn back. Some speak of sudden chills in otherwise warm water, or shadows moving just outside their light's reach. Skeptics say it's all explainable. The shadows are tricks of the light. The chills are cold pockets of groundwater. The urge to go deeper is simply the tunnel trance, a known psychological effect in cave diving. But believers argue that Jacob's Well isn't just a geological feature. It's a living thing. It decides. It takes. And when it takes, it holds on. Stories from seasoned divers feed that legend. One described feeling an invisible pressure on his back, as if the cave itself were ushering him forward. Another swore he saw a pale hand drift across his beam in the third chamber, only to find no one else nearby. There's even a tale of gear inexplicably failing in the same spot where previous divers had vanished, as if the well remembers. Whether or not you believe in the supernatural side of these stories, there's no denying the pattern. The well's surface remains as serene and postcard perfect as ever, luring in swimmers, snorkelers, and divers alike. But beneath that shimmer is a history measured not just in gallons per second, but in names carved into memorial plaques, in families left without answers, and in the haunting knowledge that the well does not forgive mistakes. The limestone walls have been there far longer than any of us, shaped by water over thousands, even millions of years. And if the stories are true, they'll be there long after, holding on to secrets we may never fully uncover. And that's why, no matter how inviting it looks, Jacob's Well remains one of the most beautiful death traps on Earth. If you thought this was intense, the next dive into history might just be darker. Like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story, and remember, some places don't forgive mistakes, ever.